On the 7th of August, 2026, Chocolate Finance announced that it was making its Visa debit card more generous. The cap on miles earnings spend doubled, from 1,000 Singapore dollars a month to 2,000. The cap on bill payments tripled, from 100 max miles a month to 300. The blog posts called it a buff. Read the rest of the announcement, and it is not a buff. The Miles Multiplier, which paid a bonus of between 5 and 100% depending on how much money you kept in your account, was removed entirely. And from October, no member earns any miles at all unless they hold a minimum average daily balance of $5,000. So the card gives you more room to earn, and then requires you to park $5,000 to earn anything. That is not a rewards change. That is a company telling you, in the only language a P and L speaks, where the money for your miles was actually coming from, and it was never coming from the card. This volume is about whether HeyMax should build a debit card of its own. The brief that commissioned it asked for 3 things in sequence: every application on the regulatory side, then every application on the technical side, then how to do enablement, marketing, and market expansion properly. I will deliver all 3, in that order, in as much operational detail as I can defend with a source. But I want to state the finding at the top, because the 3 sequences only make sense once you know what they add up to. HeyMax already has a debit card. The Chocolate Visa debit card is the card that earns max miles, and Chocolate's own crisis communications said so out loud. HeyMax has been enjoying the loyalty economics of a card program for 18 months without holding the license, the capital, the safeguarded float, the fraud losses, or the liquidity risk. In March 2025, when that card's members found an arbitrage and ran on the company, it was Chocolate that suspended withdrawals and stopped every card transaction, not HeyMax. So the question is not, can HeyMax launch a card? Of course it can. 2.5 to 4 million Singapore dollars, and about a year gets you there, and I will show you exactly where every dollar and every month goes. The question is what owning the license buys that renting Chocolates does not. And my answer, which I will spend the next hour building and then trying to break, is less than you would think and less than the card would cost. Here is the shape of the argument. A Singapore debit card is not one application. On the regulatory side, it is one license covering 2 of the 7 services in the Payment Services Act, and on the technical side, it is 11 separate approvals from 6 different counterparties, several of which cannot start until an earlier one has finished. I will walk both chains end to end. Then the arithmetic. HeyMax's own currency trades between 1.25 cents and 3 cents depending on the channel, and reimburses at 1.8. A card paying 1 mile per dollar therefore costs somewhere between 125 and 180 basis points of every dollar spent. Debit interchange in Singapore is not published anywhere, I checked, and that absence is itself a finding, but there is no debit interchange schedule on this planet at 1.8%. The gap is roughly the entire interchange line, twice over. Then the 2 case studies, both Singaporean, both recent, both the same failure. Chocolate Finance in March 2025 and LiquidPay in June 2026 were each taken apart in under a week by their own customers doing arithmetic on a merchant category code. Not by fraudsters, by members. Then enablement, marketing, and expansion, where I will argue that the card is a Singapore product with a Singapore business case, and that it does not get to borrow the expansion story from the rest of the company, because a Singapore payments license does not passport anywhere, and each new market is most of the cost again. Ground rules, as always. Every load-bearing number in this volume has a source I actually retrieved. Where I could not find something, I say so rather than filling the hole, and there is one significant hole, which is that neither Visa nor MasterCard publishes a Singapore interchange rate, and I will show you what I tried. Where I estimate, I label it an estimate and show the arithmetic so you can disagree with the working rather than the conclusion. And I will end, as every volume in this series ends, with the specific things that would change my mind. One of them has a date on it. If Chocolate raises those caps again without a balance requirement, My model of how this card is funded is wrong, and you should discount most of what follows. Let us start with the law, because the law decides what kind of card you are even allowed to want. Chapter 1: The Two Doors. There are two doors into the Singapore card business. They lead to different regulators, and choosing the wrong one costs you a year. Door 1 is the Payment Services Act of 2019. It regulates 7 payment services: account issuance, domestic money transfer, cross-border money transfer, merchant acquisition, e-money issuance, digital payment tokens, and money changing. A card that holds a stored balance and spends it at merchants is 2 of those 7, account issuance and e-money issuance, and nothing else. Door 2 is the Banking Act of 1970, Part 8. Section 57 says that a person must not, in the course of carrying on a business of issuing credit cards or charge cards, accept an application for one in Singapore unless that person is a licensee. Banks are exempt. Cards with credit limits under $500 are exempt. Store cards for your own goods are exempt. Everything else needs the license. 2 doors, and the important thing about them is which one leads to the money. Credit interchange is materially richer than debit interchange in every market where rates are published. In the European Union, the interchange fee regulation caps consumer debit at 0.2% of the transaction and consumer credit at 0.3%. Half again. In markets without caps, the ratio is wider, because a credit card issuer is carrying credit risk and funding a float and is compensated accordingly. So the door that leads to the rich economics is Part 8 of the Banking Act, and that door is effectively closed to HeyMax. Not by a capital threshold. Part 8 contains no quantified capital number in the Act itself, but by what it means to be a credit card licensee, which is to be underwriting consumer credit in Singapore, with everything that implies about provisioning, collections, and the monetary authority's appetite for a rewards company doing it. HeyMax's realistic door is Door 1, a prepaid or debit card funded from a stored e-money balance licensed under the Payment Services Act, which is precisely the low interchange end of the pool. I want to be blunt about the shape of that trade because it determines everything downstream. The achievable license gets you the thin economics. The rich economics sit behind a license you are not going to get. Every plan in the rest of this volume is built inside that constraint, and any plan that assumes otherwise is not a plan. 2 negatives are worth clearing away, because I have seen both of them in decks. You do not need a bank license. A debit card drawing on a stored e-money balance is not deposit taking. That changes the moment you pay interest on the balance or lend against it, at which point you are in Banking Act territory and the entire project is a different project. Keep that line bright, because as we will see in Chapter 7, the temptation to cross it is going to be enormous. And you do not need a merchant acquisition license. Issuing is not acquiring. HeyMax would be on the issuing side of every transaction. The acceptance side is somebody else's license and somebody else's problem. If a consultant tells you that you need Activity D, they have not read the Act. Now, which class of license? There are 3, money changing, which is irrelevant here, standard payment institution, and major payment institution. The line between standard and major is volume, and it is not a choice you make. It is a ceiling you grow into. You must be a major payment institution if you exceed 3 million Singapore dollars of monthly transactions in any single service, or 6 million across 2 or more, or $5 million of daily outstanding e-money float. Look at how low those numbers are. $3 million a month is $36 million a year. Across 150,000 users, that is $240 of card spend per user per year. Or, put the other way, it is $3,000 a year from just 1,000 active cardholders. A single enthusiastic member paying their insurance premium on the card gets you a meaningful fraction of the way there. Any card program that is not a toy blows through the standard ceiling within months. And crossing it is not a filing you make afterwards. You must have varied up to major before the day you cross, not after it. Applying for standard first and varying later means paying for 2 application processes, 2 mandatory legal opinions, and 2 positions in the review queue. And the variation queue is not faster than the original. So, major payment institution, covering account issuance and e-money issuance from day 1. That is the answer to the first half of the brief's first question. 1 license, 2 activities, and no sensible version of this where you start smaller. What that license costs, and what you must already have built before you are allowed to ask for it, is the next chapter. And I will warn you now, the capital number everybody quotes is $250,000, and it is off by roughly a factor of 10. Chapter 2, the application. The Monetary Authority publishes a document called the Guidelines on Licensing for Payment Service Providers, reference PS-G01. The current version is dated the 8th of October 2025 and runs to 43 pages. It is the closest thing to a specification that exists for what follows, and almost nobody outside the licensing industry reads it. I read all of it. Here is what it actually requires. Start with the capital, because the published number is misleading. The base capital requirement for a major payment institution is 250,000 Singapore dollars. Base capital means paid-up ordinary share capital, plus irredeemable non-cumulative preference shares, plus unappropriated profit or loss, less interim losses, and declared dividends. That is the number in the table. Now read the paragraph above the table, section 3.1.5, which says that the applicant must ensure it maintains sufficient capital buffer in excess of the requirement, and then adds this rule of thumb. The base capital of the entity should be able to cover at least 6 to 12 months of the applicant's operating expenses. That sentence is the real requirement, and it is not $250,000. For a card unit with a compliance officer, a money laundering reporting officer, an executive with a payments track record, and a small engineering team, 6 to 12 months of operating expenses is somewhere between 1.5 and 3 million Singapore dollars. Ring-fenced. Maintained at all times, with a monitoring process that proves it. Then the security deposit. A major payment institution must lodge security before it commences business, a cash deposit with the authority or a bank guarantee in the prescribed format. $100,000 if the average monthly transaction value for any one service stays under 6 million, $200,000 in all other cases. Given Chapter 1, assume $200,000. Then the people, and this is where a rewards company is most likely to fail. Section 3.1.3 requires that the executive directors and chief executive have sufficient experience operating a business in payment services or related areas of financial services, including a sufficient understanding of the Singapore regulatory framework. This is not a box you tick with a bio. It is tested at interview, and I will come to that interview in the next chapter. Section 3.1.2 applies the fit and proper standard not just to directors and the chief executive, but to shareholders and employees, and to the applicant entity itself. Beyond the usual honesty, competence, and financial soundness, the authority explicitly weighs conflict of interest and time commitment to the Singapore entity. The burden of proof sits entirely with the applicant, and the guidelines say the entity and its related group should have no adverse reputation, particularly with regard to financial crime. The director requirements are specific, and they are not paperable. Either at least one executive director who is a Singapore citizen or permanent resident, or at least one executive director on an employment pass plus at least one other director who is a citizen or permanent resident. Executive means genuinely involved in the day-to-day running of the business and resident in Singapore. And then a footnote that closes the obvious loophole. Nominee directors, investors, legal advisors, corporate secretaries are not executive directors, and job titles must reflect the substance of the role. Then the office. A permanent place of business or registered office in Singapore, an office area where books and records can be securely held. And under Notice PSN 07, at least one person physically present for a minimum of 10 days a month and a minimum of 8 hours on each of those days to address customer queries and complaints. A virtual office does not satisfy this. A hot desk does not satisfy this. Then the technology. Section 3.1.8, where the applicant intends to provide online financial services, it must perform a penetration test, remediate all high-risk findings, and conduct independent validation of the effectiveness of the remediation. That does not need to be complete before you apply, but it must be complete before the license is granted. Which means the sensible thing is to schedule the pen test to land inside the review window, rather than discovering at month 8 that you have added 3 months. Then audit twice. Independent audit arrangements to regularly assess your controls, and separately the statutory annual audit under Section 37 of the Act at your own expense, covering accounts, transactions, and compliance. And then the filing itself, which is Form 1, and the business plan attached to it, and this is the part I would print out and put on a wall. Appendix 3 tells you what the business plan must contain: jurisdictions serviced, profile of target clientele, proposed products and services with a separate assessment for each product of which payment service is being conducted at each stage of the transaction, and then this. Detailed funds flow diagrams, one per distinct flow, running from the sources of funds you accept, bank transfers, cash, cards, all the way to the point where your obligation to the customer is fully discharged, showing both the customer interaction and the movement of money, with timelines marked, including service-level agreements with third parties and settlement cycles, highlighting anywhere you use innovative technology, and naming every third party involved and showing its role. For an e-money issuer specifically, Appendix 3 adds: state the currency the e-money is denominated in, explain how issuance will be timely, list the account issuers and third parties that support and accept your e-money, and explain how the balance will be recorded and reflected accurately by all of them. For account issuance, if you operate personal payment accounts, describe your monitoring measures for the stock and flow restrictions in Section 24 of the Act, the thresholds you will set, how often you will check, and the remedial measures when an account approaches the limit. And one thing that is not optional: the legal opinion. Every new applicant for a standard or major license must submit one with the application, from a law firm with Actual Payment Services Act experience, summarizing the business model and assessing which of the 7 services the applicant is really conducting. If the first opinion is unclear, the authority reserves the right to ask for a second. Now the bill. The statutory items are small and the real items are not. Annual license fees from the worked examples in Appendix 4. A major payment institution conducting account issuance and e-money issuance pays 10,000 Singapore dollars a year. That is it. There is an exception built into the schedule where account issuance bundled with another service adds nothing. You can read it straight off the examples, where a standard institution with account issuance plus cross-border transfer pays 5,000, and adding money changing takes it to 6,500. $10,000 a year. The smallest line on the page, and I mention it mainly so nobody mistakes the license fee for the cost of the license. Here is the rest, and the ranges outside the statutory rows are my estimates from Singapore market rates rather than the authority's figures. Base capital, statutory 250,000, realistically 1.5 to 3 million. Security deposit, 200,000. The mandatory legal opinion, 40 to 80,000. Compliance officer and money laundering reporting officer, 1/4 to 400,000 a year, and they must be in place before you file. An executive with a genuine payments track record, 300,000 and up. Penetration test, remediation and independent validation, 60 to 120,000 before grant. An office that satisfies the presence rule, 60,000 a year and up. The statutory annual audit, 30 to 60,000 a year. Add it honestly, and you get roughly 2.5 to 4 million Singapore dollars committed, and about a year elapsed before a single transaction settles. That is the gate. And it is worth holding in your head through the next chapter, because there is one more thing standing between the money and the license, and it is not a document. It is a conversation. Chapter 3, The Review Room. Appendix 5 of the Licensing Guidelines is titled Rules of Engagement for the Application Review Process. It is 4 pages long. It is the most candid document I have read from a financial regulator, and I do not think most applicants understand that it is a warning. Let me read you the mechanics, and then tell you what I think it is really describing. The clock does not start when you file. The review process begins when a case officer is assigned and upon complete submission of all information and documents required. Assignment depends on the volume of applications received and may not happen immediately. So there is a queue in front of the queue, and nothing you can do shortens it except filing something complete. The first round of questions is a completeness check. The case officer checks the submitted documents, and that typically forms the first round of information requests. Then there may be multiple further rounds, depending, and the guidelines say this plainly, on the completeness of your responses. Incomplete submissions can simply be rejected. Where submissions are assessed as grossly incomplete or significantly deficient, the authority reserves the right to reject the application. Not pause it, reject it. Miss a deadline and you are deemed to have withdrawn. If the applicant fails to respond within the stipulated time, the authority will deem the application to be withdrawn. You may ask for more time in advance. And then, immediately after that, a sentence that reads like it was written after watching people fail. The applicant must balance the time needed to provide an adequate and comprehensive response against rushing out a hasty response in the hopes of speeding up the review. Failing to provide a satisfactory response will be assessed as a deficiency, resulting in unfavorable consideration. So you can lose by being slow, and you can lose by being fast. Then the interview, and this is the paragraph I would make every executive read twice. The case officer will typically arrange an interview with the applicant's key management personnel and the compliance officer. And then, consultants, external legal counsel, and other third parties are not permitted to attend. The stated reason is that the applicant remains responsible for meeting its regulatory obligations even if it outsources the functions. Think about what that does. Everything else in this application can be bought. The legal opinion is bought. The policies are bought or templated. The funds flow diagrams can be drawn by a consultancy that has drawn 40 of them. The interview cannot be bought because the people who wrote your documents are not allowed in the room. And the guidelines then list the grounds on which a case officer may reasonably conclude you will not be able to discharge your obligations. Not turning up without a valid reason. Not being able to address questions clearly during the interview. And, I promise I am not embellishing, verbally abusing the case officer. That third item tells you something about the population of applicants. The second tells you everything about what the interview is for. Here is my reading of Appendix 5. It is not a process document. It is a filter for a specific failure mode. The applicant who has purchased a license application rather than built a licensable business. Every mechanism in it, the completeness gate, the deemed withdrawal, the no consultants rule, the explicit instruction that the case officer will review the application as though the applicant were already a regulated financial institution, is aimed at the same person. The one whose compliance function is a retainer, whose executive director is a name, and whose understanding of their own funds flow ends where the deck ends. For a company like HeyMax, that matters more than usual, and I want to be fair about why. HeyMax is a genuinely capable consumer product company. It is not a payments company. The chief executive who can answer, unaided and under questioning, how the e-money float is safeguarded, what happens to a customer's balance if the safeguarding institution fails, which of the 7 services is being conducted at each leg of a linked card transaction, and what the remedial measure is when a personal payment account approaches the Section 24 threshold. That person has to be hired, and hired early enough to have actually built the thing they are describing. That is the hidden schedule item. not the pen test, not the legal opinion. The 12 months of someone senior being accountable for a payments business before there is a payments business. 2 more mechanisms worth knowing about, because they turn a delay into a disaster. Material changes after filing, a change of key personnel, a change in business model, may trigger an additional interview. Or worse, the authority reserves the right to place any application assessed as insufficiently ready for review on hold for 6 months, in the event of major corporate restructuring, substantial changes to key management, or material variations in the business model. And then, the default on-hold period is 6 months and is not extendable. If the change is not completed within it, you should consider withdrawing. So if your head of compliance resigns in month 5 or your board pivots the product in month 7, you are not delayed by a few weeks. You are potentially 6 months on ice, and if the change is not finished by the time the ice melts, you start again. How long does all this take? The guidelines do not publish a service standard, and I went looking. I grepped all 43 pages for months, timeline, processing, and indicative, and the document is written around a queue of ready applicants rather than a promised duration. That absence is itself informative. The real timeline is demand-dependent. What the market reports, and what I would plan against, is roughly 4 months for a genuinely straightforward case, 6 to 9 months as typical, and up to 12 for complex business models. A 2-activity major license attached to a rewards proposition that the authority has not seen before is not straightforward. Plan on 9 months from complete filing. Then add 3 to 4 months in front of it for incorporation, the hires, the policies, and the legal opinion. 12 to 13 months from decision to license. That is the honest number, and it assumes nothing goes wrong. Now that is door 1 fully described. 1 license, 2 activities, roughly a year, roughly $3 million, and a conversation you cannot outsource. Before we spend any of it, I want to show you the 3 other ways to put a card in a member's hand. Because one of them takes 6 months instead of 18, one of them costs nothing at all, and one of them is a trap that looks exactly like HeyMax. Chapter 4, 4 Doors to a Card. Becoming an issuer is one route. It is not the only one, and it is probably not the first one. There are 4, and the differences between them are worth more than any single decision in this volume. Route A is what Chapter 2 and 3 described. Your own major payment institution license, plus, and this is the part people forget, your own membership of a card scheme. The scheme is not a regulator, but it behaves like one. Principal membership of Visa or MasterCard requires its own application pack, business plan, financials, anti-money laundering procedures, evidence you are aligned with the scheme's core rules. A principal settles funds with the scheme directly, which means settlement banking and pre-funding. Industry guidance puts first-year scheme membership at roughly 50 to 100,000 euros in application and project fees before you trade a single dollar, then volume-tiered fees afterwards. And a non-bank can do this in Singapore. I want to be precise here because it is the single most useful precedent in this whole analysis, and it is local. UTrip launched in August 2018 as a partnership. EasyLink was the issuer and the holder of the stored value accounts, and U Technologies Group ran the product. Then, in October 2019, UTrip took over the issuer role itself, under a MasterCard principal license, while keeping the EasyLink brand partnership. Launch sponsored, graduate to principal. A Singapore company in Singapore doing exactly the sequence I am going to recommend at the end of this volume. Visa's own guidance for the region is consistent with it. A program sponsor in Asia Pacific may include non-financial institutions and is typically domiciled in the country it sponsors for, so a partner distributing Visa accounts in Singapore would have a Singapore-domiciled sponsor to ensure local regulatory requirements are met. Route B is to be the program manager under somebody else's bin. They hold the license and the scheme membership. You build the product, own the customer, set the rules, and ride their infrastructure. This is the standard fintech launch shape, and it exists in Singapore today with named counterparties. Airwallex is a Visa principal member and acts as a BIN sponsor across 40-plus markets. Neum offers card issuing in 30-plus markets, positioned explicitly as removing the complexity of BIN sponsorship and local licensing, and has launched local issuing in Singapore, processed by Thread. Matchmove is a Singapore embedded finance platform doing card issuing, chosen by at least one bank partner specifically on the strength of its Singapore regulatory standing. And Thread itself, formerly Global Processing Services, sits behind a large share of these, with a Singapore operating footprint and 130-plus fintech and digital bank clients across 50-plus countries. 3 to 6 months to live cards. Low 6 figures to integrate, plus per card and per transaction fees, plus a revenue share on the interchange. And that revenue share is the catch, because it is a share of the exact line that is supposed to fund the rewards. We will do that arithmetic in Chapter 6, and it does not survive being shared. The other catch is concentration risk, and it is not theoretical. When Wirecard collapsed in June 2020, cards across Europe stopped working overnight, not because the program managers had done anything wrong, but because their sponsor had. If your sponsor exits, gets acquired, or loses its own license, your product is a plastic rectangle. Route C is to co-brand with a bank. You issue nothing. A bank issues a HeyMax branded card. You supply the brand, the members, and the currency. They supply the license, the balance sheet, and the call center. 9 to 15 months, almost all of it commercial negotiation. Near zero capital. Often the bank pays you a bounty per activated card and a share of spend. And there is a specific reason this is awkward for HeyMax, which has nothing to do with economics. HeyMax's existing business is telling members which bank card to use. A co-brand makes HeyMax the promoter of one issuer, which corrodes the neutrality the entire comparison and content layer rests on. You cannot run a card comparison engine and a co-brand with one of the compared cards without somebody noticing. I will come back to this in Chapter 10 because a version of the problem exists on every route. Route D is the interesting one, and it is the trap. Do not issue at all. Sit on top of the cards members already carry. This is not hypothetical. Amaze by Insterm does exactly this in Singapore. Members link up to 5 Singapore-issued MasterCards, spend through Amaze, and the transaction is charged to the underlying card. The member keeps whatever their own credit card earns, and Amaze layers its own points on top. Look at that model, and it is HeyMax's thesis rendered in hardware. Stack on top of what the member already has. Stay neutral. Take no license worth the name. If you had asked me to design the card HeyMax should build from first principles, I would have drawn Amaze. Now look at what has happened to it. Linked card transactions earn no in-store points at all. The points accrue only on the wallet balance or on foreign currency spend. And from the 10th of March 2025, card-linked transactions denominated in Singapore dollars carry a 1% domestic fee, with a minimum of 50 cents. Read those two changes together and the story is complete. Insterm built the overlay, discovered that on a linked card transaction, the interchange flows to the underlying issuer and not to them, and therefore could neither fund rewards on domestic spend nor absorb the cost of processing it. So they stopped paying rewards on it and started charging for it. The Miles Lyons review from the 15th of August 2026, published as I was writing this, is fair about where that leaves the product. Amaze survives, but on a narrower proposition. Earning 4 miles per dollar with a 2% foreign exchange spread is still better than earning 4 miles per dollar with a bank's 3.25%. It is a currency conversion product with a rewards residue, not a rewards product. That is the most important finding in this chapter, and it is a negative one. The route that looks most like HeyMax is the route whose economics have already been publicly falsified, in the same city, under the same interchange regime, by a better capitalized competitor who spent 5 years finding out. So here is the comparison, honestly. Route A gives you full economics, control of the bin, and an asset with independent value. For $2.5 to $4 million, 12 to 18 months, and a permanent operating burden that never goes away. Route B gives you a live card in 3 to 6 months for around $500,000, at the cost of thinner economics, rules you did not write, and a single point of failure you do not control. Route C is nearly free and is disqualified less by economics than by conflict of interest. Route D is fast, neutral, and does not work. My reading: Route B is the only sane first move, structured from day one as a bridge to Route A, which is to say, the U-trip sequence. Launch sponsored, learn what you actually have, and take the principal license when the volume justifies it. There is one detail in that plan that will cost you if you ignore it, so let me plant it now. Under sponsorship, you get a range inside somebody else's bin. The bin carries the program's identity for the rest of its life. Migrating to your own later means reissuing every card in the field. Plan the graduation at the start or budget the reissue event. Which brings us to the second half of the brief, the technical side, which is not one application either. Chapter 5, 11 Approvals. The brief asked for all the applications on the technical side. The regulatory side had one, Form 1. The technical side has 11 separate approvals from 6 different counterparties, and several of them cannot begin until an earlier one has finished. That dependency chain, not the engineering, is why card programs slip. Here they are in order. 1. Scheme membership, or the sponsorship agreement that stands in for it, covered in the last chapter. Under Route A, this is a second full application. Under Route B, it collapses into a commercial contract, which is most of the reason Route B is faster. You are inheriting a membership, not obtaining one. 2. The bin, an 8-digit issuer identification range allocated by the scheme to a principal member. Under sponsorship, a range inside the sponsors. As I said, this decision has a 15-year tail. 3. Program approval. The scheme approves the program, not just the entity. Product type, acceptance geography, merchant category restrictions, cash access limits. Hold that word, restrictions, in mind. Chapter 8 is about what happens when you get it wrong. 4. Card art approval from the scheme's brand team. Placement of the mark, the hologram, the contactless indicator, the chip window. Rejections here are routine and cost weeks. 5. Issuer processor integration. This is where the real engineering lives. Your options are Thread, Marqeta, Infuse, Episode 6, or the issuing stack of the sponsor itself. The processor receives an authorization request from the scheme and asks your system exactly one question, in tens of milliseconds: approve or decline. Everything HeyMax cares about, the rewards logic, the balance, the limits, the merchant category rules, lives behind that one question. And there is an architectural decision here that determines what kind of product you are able to build. Does HeyMax hold the ledger, or does the processor? If the processor holds it, integration is a matter of weeks, and HeyMax can do nothing clever at authorization time. If HeyMax holds it, HeyMax must answer an authorization inside the scheme's timeout, every single time, at 4 nines of availability forever. That is a real-time systems commitment a content and rewards company has never had to make, and it does not get easier at 3 in the morning on the second day of Chinese New Year. I would take the processor's ledger for a pilot without hesitating, and I would treat, when do we need our own ledger, as the question that decides whether this is a product or a platform. 6. EMV chip certification. Functional certification, chip personalization validation for contactless validation. Scripted test cards, lab bookings, and a queue, budget 8 to 14 weeks and assume one failed run. This is the step you cannot compress with money, and therefore the step that sets your launch date. Which is the strongest argument in this chapter for shipping virtual only first, because virtual issuance removes chip certification and the entire physical fulfillment chain from the critical path at a stroke. 7. Tokenization. Enablement with the scheme's token service, MDES for MasterCard, the Visa token service for Visa. Without this, the card exists but does not appear in Apple Pay, Google Wallet, or Samsung Pay, and in Singapore that is not a nice-to-have. It is most of the acceptance experience. There are 3 distinct pieces of work inside this one line, and each is its own certification. Token requester enablement and lab certification with the token service provider. Identification and verification configuration, the green, yellow, and red paths that decide whether provisioning a card into a wallet is approved silently, requires a one-time passcode, or is refused outright. Set it too loose and fraudsters provision your cards. Set it too tight and your own members cannot add their own card, which is a support ticket at the exact moment of highest intent. And push provisioning, one tap inside the HeyMax app and the card lands in the member's wallet. I will argue in Chapter 9 that this is the highest conversion feature in the entire build. There is a trap in the Apple leg, specifically that catches teams every time. Scheme approval of your card design does not satisfy Apple. You must separately configure card art and card templates in Apple's own portal, capture the card template identifier it generates, pass that identifier at initiation, and align it with the assets held in the token service. 2 approvals for 1 picture. 8. 3D Secure, an access control server for e-commerce authentication, plus a step-up method, one-time passcode, or in-app biometric. Under sponsorship, this is usually the sponsor's server. Owning it is a later decision. 9. Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, assessed by a qualified security assessor annually. Get the version right, because the ground moved recently. Version 4.0.1 is the only live version. Version 3.2.1 retired on the 31st of March 2024. Version 4.0 retired on the 31st of December that year. And of the 64 new requirements, the 51 future-dated ones became mandatory on the 31st of March 2025. Assessments from that date score every one of them in scope, with no best practice carve-out and no grace period. Requirement 3 carries applicability notes written specifically for issuers, because issuers have a legitimate business need to hold sensitive authentication data that merchants do not. And there is a scope decision here worth real money, which you make in week 1 and can almost never unwind. If HeyMax never touches a card number, the processor renders it, the app displays it through a processor-hosted component, and card data never transits a HeyMax system, the assessment is a fraction of the size. If one product decision puts a card number into a HeyMax log line, the entire platform is in scope. Decide it early and enforce it architecturally, because retrofitting it costs more than building it. 10. The penetration test for the authority rather than the schemes, Section 3.1.8 from Chapter 2. Test, remediate all high-risk findings, independently validate, before grant. 11. Settlement and disputes. Settlement account and pre-funding with the scheme, daily net settlement, and reconciliation across 3 sets of books that will not agree. The scheme's clearing files, the processor's ledger, and your own. Then chargeback operations under the scheme's dispute rules, with mandated response deadlines that a small team will miss at least once before it builds the tooling. And then the things nobody puts on the architecture diagram. Card production if you ship plastic. A personalization bureau, plastics, pin mailers, delivery, replacement logistics, and the fact that a lost card is a customer service event with a 3 to 5 day physical tail. Know your customer at onboarding, where Singapore hands you an advantage that is easy to take for granted. SingPass MyInfo populates a government-verified profile in seconds. 3 minutes in Singapore is 3 days almost anywhere else. Enjoy it, and remember in Chapter 11 that it does not travel. Anti-money laundering operations under Notice PSN 01, screening, transaction monitoring, suspicious transaction reporting. A staffed function, not a vendor. And consumer protection, where there is one genuinely good piece of news. The Shared Responsibility Framework, live since the 16th of December 2024, applies to full banks, telcos, and major payment institutions that issue personal payment accounts containing e-money. HeyMax would be squarely in scope for the account. but the framework's liability provisions do not extend to transactions on credit, charge, or debit cards issued in Singapore. That exclusion is checkable, and it is worth stating plainly, because it is one of the few places where Singapore's regulatory environment actively favors the card over the alternative. The card rail sits outside the payout regime that makes wallet-to-wallet transfer products expensive to run here. So, what does the calendar look like? Under Route B, with 6 to 8 competent engineers, sponsor selection and program design in the first 6 weeks, processor integration and the authorization path from week 4 to 14, card art and EMV certification from 10 to 18, tokenization, identification paths, and push provisioning from 12 to 20, 3D secure, know your customer and dispute runbooks from 14 to 22. The security assessment, penetration test, and remediation from 18 to 24, staged rollout by 26. 6 months is achievable, 4 is not, and the reason is item 6, which runs on a lab queue that does not care about your launch date. Under Route A, add the authorities' review to the front, and you are at 12 to 18 months. That is both halves of the brief's first question answered. 1 regulatory application, 11 technical ones, roughly a year, roughly $3 million. Now let us find out whether the thing at the end of it can pay for itself. Chapter 6, the Arithmetic. To know whether a card can pay for miles, you need 2 numbers, what a mile costs and what a swipe earns. HeyMax publishes the first one. Nobody publishes the second one, and I want to show you how hard I looked, because the absence is a finding in itself. Neither Visa nor MasterCard publishes a Singapore interchange schedule. I checked 3 interchange URLs on the Visa Singapore site, all returned a 404, and grepped the Visa Singapore homepage link graph for the word interchange, which appears 0 times. The MasterCard Singapore interchange page renders a not found. Their sitemap returns an access denied. And when I retried MasterCard Singapore's merchant interchange page on the 15th of August 2026, I got an Akamai access denied to both a normal fetch and a curl carrying a browser user agent. The schemes publish interchange only where a regulator compels them to. The United States, the European Economic Area, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada. Singapore is not on that list. And the Monetary Authority confirmed the policy position directly in a written parliamentary reply dated the 3rd of March 2026, answering Mr. Victor Lai, Member of Parliament for Ang Mo Kio, given by Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Yong as chairman of the authority. The reply says the authority's approach is to encourage competition to foster innovation. It says international card schemes are generally higher cost, varying from merchant to merchant, while domestic schemes, NETS at point of sale, Pay Now, and the Singapore QR code are significantly lower in cost. And it discloses that over the past 4 years, card revenue at Singapore banks, of which a portion comprises interchange, network, and co-branding fees, has averaged around 3% of total revenue. No cap, no transparency mandate, no number. So I have to estimate, and I will label it as 1. My working range for Singapore domestic consumer debit interchange is 50 to 100 basis points, 0.5% to 1%, with cross-border materially higher. The basis: the European Economic Area caps consumer debit at 20 basis points and consumer credit at 30. Regulated United States debit is a few cents. Uncapped markets run higher, but consumer debit rarely clears 1% domestically, and the authority describes international schemes as higher cost than local rails without hinting at an outlier. And whatever that gross number is, the program does not keep it. Under sponsorship, the sponsor and processor take a share. Marqeta's own filings give a hard floor for what the processing stack costs. Net revenue of 16.3 basis points of total processing volume in its 2025 financial year, of which about 4 basis points goes straight to the networks. That is Marqeta at hundreds of billions of dollars of volume, with the pricing leverage that implies. 150,000 user program sits at the top of the price card, not the bottom. Now the other number, which HeyMax does publish. HeyMax first sells max miles forward at 2.3 to 3.0 cents per mile, depending on tier. Fly Anywhere reimburses miles at 1.8 Singapore cents. And on the 8th of August 2026, a week ago as I write this, Chocolate Finance launched miles for returns, letting members buy max miles at 1.25 cents each. So the currency trades in a band from about 1.25 cents to 3 cents, and it redeems at 1.8. Now price a card, paying 1 max mile per dollar. $1 of spend generates 1 max mile. At the Fly Anywhere reimbursement rate, that mile costs 1.8 cents, which is 180 basis points of the transaction. At the cheapest observed channel price, 1.25 cents, 125 basis points. Against gross interchange of 50 to 100, before the sponsor's share. 1 mile per dollar costs between 125 and 180 basis points, and earns between 50 and 100. I want to be careful about how much weight that conclusion is bearing, because I do not know Singapore's exact interchange rate, and neither does anyone outside the schemes. So let me state it in a form that does not depend on the number I could not find. There is no consumer debit interchange schedule anywhere in the world at 1.8%. Not in the uncapped markets, not in the exempt tiers, not on premium products. The gap here is not a modeling assumption I have chosen conveniently. It is roughly the entire interchange line, twice over, and no plausible value of the missing number closes it. Which raises the obvious question: what has been funding the chocolate card for the last 18 months? Because that card paid 2 max miles per dollar at launch, on virtually everything: donations, education, hospitals, insurance premiums, utilities, and bill payments through AXS. 2 miles per dollar is 360 basis points at the reimbursement rate. If 180 is impossible, 360 is not a rounding error away from impossible. It is a different category of statement. The answer is that it was never funded by interchange, and on the 7th of August 2026, the company told us so. That is the next chapter, and it is the one that changed my mind while I was writing this. Chapter 7, What Chocolate Just Told Us. Let me put the whole arc on one timeline first, because the shape of it is the argument. 5th of February 2025. The Chocolate Visa card launches, 2 max miles per Singapore dollar on virtually everything, including charitable donations, education, hospitals, insurance premiums, utilities, and AXS bill payments. 5th of March, AXS support is removed. 12th of March. After a weekend surge in withdrawal requests, instant withdrawals are suspended, and all transactions on the card are stopped. When the card comes back, it carries a $250 per transaction cap, and merchant category code 6540, electronic wallet top-ups, is blocked entirely. 14th of March, the transaction limit is raised to $1,000. 4th of June, the earn rate is cut to 1 mile per dollar, and bill payments are capped. 11th of July, 2026. The Mile Lion reviews the card and returns a verdict of take it or leave it, neither great nor terrible, and most of the time it will be sitting in your sock drawer. 1 mile per dollar on the first $1,000 a month, 0.4 after that, and 100 max miles a month maximum on bill payments. 16 months, 5 public retreats, from 2 miles on everything to 1 mile on $1,000. And then, on the 7th of August 2026, the announcement that decodes it. Effective the 1st of September, the base cap doubles from $1,000 a month to $2,000, still at 1 mile per dollar. The bill payment cap triples from 100 max miles a month to 300. Also effective, the Miles Multiplier is removed entirely, the bonus of 5 to 100% that scaled with your account balance. And from October 2026, no member earns any miles at all without a minimum average daily balance of 5,000 Singapore dollars. Aaron Wong at the Mile Lion put his finger on the reason in one word: The minimum balance exists because it does not make business sense for a funds manager when customers use the card as a pass-through. That word is the key to the entire lock. Chocolate Finance is not a bank and not a payments company. Its own website says it. Not a bank, an asset manager designed to deliver a happier return on your spare cash. It pays 2.2 to 2.5% a year on Singapore dollar balances, 4.1 on US dollars. Its margin is the spread between what its portfolio earns and what it pays out. The card was never a payments product. It is an assets under management gathering device. Here is the model, and here is my arithmetic so you can attack it. Take a member holding the newly required $5,000. Chocolate earns a portfolio yield and pays out 2.2 to 2.5%, so call the net spread 1 to 1.5%. On $5,000, that is $50 to $75 a year, $4 to $6 a month. Now the card. Say that member spends $600 a month on it, which is a realistic figure for a secondary card. At 50 to 100 basis points of interchange, that is $3 to $6 a month. Total funding available, $7 to $12 a month. And the cost, 600 miles at 1.8 cents, is $10.80 a month. It closes, just. At average spend, with the balance requirement in place, the unit economics of that card work, and they work because the float leg is doing roughly half of it. Now run it at the cap. $2,000 of spend at 1 mile per dollar is 2,000 miles, which at 1.8 cents is $36 of cost against at most $12 of funding. Which is why the cap exists. The cap is the funding ceiling made visible. And it explains every other move in that announcement. The Miles Multiplier scaled rewards with balance, but it was a bonus, paid on top, so a large balance made the member more expensive, not less. Replacing it with a threshold inverts that. Instead of paying more to members who hold more, Chocolate now pays nothing to members who hold less. Same intuition about where the money comes from, opposite sign, much better economics. And the members who maximize the card, the ones who would fill a $2,000 cap every month, are precisely the ones who keep no balance because their money is working somewhere else. The October requirement is aimed directly at them. Now, the consequence for HeyMax, which is the whole reason this chapter exists. If HeyMax issues its own card, HeyMax gets the interchange leg and nothing else. HeyMax has no asset management business. It cannot earn a portfolio spread on member balances, and as a major payment institution, it specifically must not, because the e-money float is safeguarded in a trust account or under a bank undertaking precisely so that it cannot be worked. And paying members a return on that balance walks straight into the deposit-taking line I drew in Chapter 1, which is the Banking Act, not the Payment Services Act. So a HeyMax-issued card would be structurally worse than the chocolate card it replaced. Same interchange, minus the float spread that is currently doing half the work. On the numbers above, the sustainable earn rate is roughly 0.3 to 0.5 max miles per dollar. A third to a half of what members get today, from a partner card that costs HeyMax nothing to run. There is exactly one honest counterargument, and it is a real one. HeyMax mints the currency. Chocolate has to buy max miles. Members going through miles for returns pay 1.25 cents. HeyMax's own marginal cost is neither 1.25 nor 1.8. It is the wholesale cost of the airline and hotel currency it eventually transfers into, discounted by breakage on miles that are never redeemed at all. That is a genuine edge, and it deserves quantifying rather than waving at. If HeyMax's true marginal cost is, say, 1 to 1.3 cents rather than 1.8, then 1 mile per dollar costs 100 to 130 basis points instead of 180. It narrows the gap. It does not close it, because gross interchange still tops out around 100 basis points before anyone takes a share. Where it does close is at a lower earn rate. At half a mile per dollar, the cost is 50 to 65 basis points against 50 to 100 of gross interchange. That card funds itself. So here is the finding, and it is narrower and more useful than a yes or a no. HeyMax can build a card whose economics work. It cannot build a card whose economics work and which members prefer to the one they already have. Those are two different cards, and only one of them is worth $3 million. And here is my falsifier, with a date attached. If Chocolate raises those caps again without a balance requirement, or restores the Miles Multiplier while dropping the $5,000 minimum, then the interchange leg is bigger than I think. My model is wrong, and you should discount this chapter and the two before it. Watch for it. It would be the cheapest possible test of everything I have just argued. Chapter 8, 2 runs, 1 cause. Twice in 15 months, a Singapore payments company has been taken apart in under a week by its own customers. Not by fraudsters, by members with a spreadsheet. Both times the root cause was the same, and it was not capital, and it was not technology. It was a merchant category code. The first was Chocolate Finance, in March 2025. The card launched paying 2 max miles per dollar on virtually everything, and virtually everything included AXS bill payments and merchant category code 6540, which is electronic wallet top-ups. Members did the arithmetic. Top up a GrabPay wallet with the Chocolate card, earning 2 miles per dollar. Withdraw from GrabPay. Repeat. The money never leaves your pocket, and the miles are real. At 2 cents a mile, that is a 4% return on a round trip that takes 90 seconds. Enough people did it enough times that the company's liquidity broke. Instant withdrawals, normally up to $20,000 a day, were suspended. All card transactions were stopped. When the card came back, it carried a $250 per transaction cap, raised to $1,000 2 days later, and code 6540 was blocked outright. The chief executive later told CNA that allowing AXS had been a mistake in the first place. The Mile Lyons assessment at the time was not gentle. A case study in how not to do crisis communications, trust lost, and many customers likely to treat the product as a conduit rather than a store of value. The second was LiquidPay in June 2026, 15 months later, same shape. Liquid Group launched LiquidPay 2.0 on the 23rd of June 2026, letting users earn credit card rewards at QR code merchants. The company used merchant category code 5399 for both card purchases and account top-ups, and 5399 is a rewards earning code. Within hours, members had found it. Top up a Liquid account with a debit card and a Maze card, for instance, earning miles. Cash out instantly via PayNow. As the Mile Lion described the mechanism, when you top up with a card, Liquid Group does not receive the funds immediately, but when you cash out through PayNow, there is an instant outflow from their coffers. Pay 1 cent, get 3. Within 24 hours, the company had disabled credit card payments entirely and raised debit top-up fees from 1% to 3.5%. Withdrawals started failing on circuit breakers. The category code was subsequently moved to 6540, the same code Chocolate had blocked the previous year. One launch lasted a day. Now I could tell you the lesson is, get your merchant category codes right, and that would be true and useless. Here is what I think the lesson actually is. On a rewards earning payment product, the merchant category table is not configuration. It is the risk management system. It is the single artifact that determines whether your product is a payment instrument or a money pump, and it is usually owned by whoever set up the processor integration, reviewed by nobody, and changed by ticket. Both of these companies had capital. Both had licenses. Both had competent people. Both were dismantled by a spreadsheet in less than a week because the file that decides which transactions earn rewards was not treated as a control. And there is a second-order lesson that matters more for HeyMax specifically. Look at the mechanism in both cases. It is not that a category earned rewards. It is that a category earned rewards and provided a fast path back to cash, wallet top-ups, bill payment aggregators, instant withdrawal. The arbitrage requires both legs, a rewarded inflow and a liquid outflow, and it is the combination that kills you. Which means the control is not just an allow list of categories. It is a rule that says, any merchant category that converts our stored value into somebody else's spendable value earns nothing, no matter how it is coded, plus velocity limits that make a round trip uneconomic even if a code slips through, plus a settlement timing model that does not let cash out before cash in. And HeyMax has a particular exposure here that neither Chocolate nor Liquid Group had. Singapore's Miles optimization community is small, expert, public, and relentless. It publishes step-by-step guides to exactly this kind of arbitrage. The Mile Lion covered both of these incidents within a day and covered the techniques long before the incidents. That community is not an adversary. It is an audience. And it is HeyMax's audience. The members most likely to take a HeyMax card on day 1 in volume are the members most likely to find whatever is wrong with it by day 3. The company's core asset, a highly engaged community of Miles optimizers, is, from a card program's perspective, the highest-risk cardholder cohort in the market. That is not an argument against building. It is an argument about the order in which you build. The merchant category policy, the velocity limits, the funding source rules, and the settlement timing all have to be designed before the card art, and they have to be reviewed by someone whose job is to attack them. If I were running this program, I would hire the arbitrage before it hires itself. Pay 2 of the sharpest people in that community to spend a fortnight trying to break the rules in a sandbox before a single real card is provisioned. It is the cheapest insurance available, and both of the companies in this chapter would have bought it twice over in hindsight. One last observation, and it points forward. Both of these were liquidity events, not credit events. Nobody defaulted. The products worked exactly as specified. What failed was the assumption that stored value would sit still, and in both cases the company discovered, over a weekend, at scale, that it had written a promise it could not fund at the speed the promise could be called. That is the risk you take on when you hold the float. And it is precisely the risk HeyMax does not carry today because Chocolate carries it. Which is worth putting in the ledger, next to everything the license would buy. Chapter 9, Enablement. The third clause of the brief asked about enablement, marketing, and market expansion. And this is the part of a card plan that usually gets 3 bullet points and then kills the program. Enablement means getting a card from approved to habitually used. It is a funnel with 5 gates, and each one is a place a card program fails quietly. Gate 1 is applied. The card has to be visible where members already are. HeyMax's position is unusual. It already has the audience, and it already publishes a shelf of other people's cards, which is both the advantage and, as we will see in the next chapter, the tax. Gate 2 is approved. In Singapore, this is the easy gate, and I do not want it taken for granted. SingPass MyInfo populates a government-verified Know Your Customer profile in seconds. An onboarding flow that takes 3 minutes in Singapore takes 3 days almost anywhere else in the region. Design around it, and write down that you are borrowing an advantage that does not travel, because Chapter 11 is going to hand the bill back. Gate 3 is provisioned, and this is the gate that matters most and gets the least attention. A card sitting inside an app is not a card. It is a picture of a card. The transition from issued to in the wallet the member actually pays with is where most of the funnel is lost, and the feature that fixes it is push provisioning. One tap in the HeyMax app, and the card is in Apple Wallet or Google Wallet. I called it the highest leverage feature in the entire build in Chapter 5, and I will defend that. It is the difference between a member who might use the card and a member who has already used it, at the exact moment their intent is highest. And as Chapter 5 described, it is a distinct integration with its own scheme certification, its own identification and verification configuration, and its own Apple portal setup that scheme approval does not cover. Ship virtual first with push provisioning on day 1. Treat the plastic as a later, optional artifact for the members who ask. This single decision removes chip certification and the entire physical fulfillment chain from your critical path, and it improves the funnel rather than compromising it. Gate 4 is the first transaction, and here standard practice is wrong for a specific reason. The standard move is an activation bonus. Fine, but an activation bonus paid in max miles is paid in a currency HeyMax mints, which means the promotional budget is directly exposed to the behavior that took chocolate apart in March 2025 and LiquidPay apart in June 2026. So, pay the activation bonus capped in absolute miles on a defined merchant category allow list once and never as a rate. A rate is an invitation to volume. A capped absolute amount is a cost you have already budgeted. Gate 5 is top of wallet, the hard one, and the one where honesty is worth more than optimism. The competitive set in Singapore is not other debit cards. It is a mature miles credit card market where members routinely earn 4 miles per dollar on online spend. And from Chapter 7, a self-funding HeyMax debit card supports roughly 0.3 to 0.5 miles per dollar. A card paying 0.4 miles per dollar cannot win top of wallet on rate, and it should not try. What it can win is the ground rate does not reach, which is exactly where the Mile Lion located the chocolate card's remaining value, bill payments, and the categories where other cards pay nothing at all. Insurance premiums, utilities, government services, medical. Places the 4 miles per dollar cards explicitly exclude. That is a real niche. It is defensible, and it is small. Position for it honestly, and the card is a useful complement that members are glad to hold. Position it as a primary card, and members will run the arithmetic within a week, because running the arithmetic is what this audience does for entertainment. And now the metric, because the wrong metric will let you believe a failing program is working. The number that matters is not cards issued. Cards issued is a marketing number, and it goes up whatever happens. The number is provisioned and active at day 30, added to a mobile wallet, 3 or more transactions, still transacting in the second month. If that number is under 30%, the program is not working, whatever the issuance chart says. Write the threshold down before launch, because afterwards there will be a very reasonable-sounding argument for why this particular cohort is different. One more thing about enablement that is not about members at all. There is a second meaning of the word, and a card program needs both. Internal enablement, the support team that has to answer why a transaction declined, when a dispute will resolve, what happens to a balance if a card is lost. A payments product generates a category of customer contact that a rewards platform simply does not have. Real-time, money-related, and emotionally loaded. A declined card at a supermarket checkout is a different support ticket from a delayed miles posting. Budget for it, staff it before launch rather than after, and give the team a runbook for the 3 scenarios that will actually happen. A decline the member does not understand, a disputed transaction, and a lost card at the airport. That last one is worth designing for specifically. The moment a HeyMax card fails is disproportionately likely to be the moment a member is traveling, because travel is what the entire product is for. A card that dies in Bangkok is not a support ticket. It is the end of a relationship, and it will be posted about. Chapter 10, the Neutrality Tax. HeyMax has the cheapest card marketing channel in Singapore, and launching a card is the one thing that could damage it. Start with the asset. The Today volume in this series established the scale of HeyMax's search estate, over 5,200 pages, ranking on the questions people ask before they choose a card. That is a compounding acquisition machine. It costs nothing marginal to run, and it is pointed at exactly the audience a card program needs. Any other company launching a debit card in Singapore has to buy that traffic. HeyMax already owns it. Now the tax. Those pages rank because they compare bank cards, and they are trusted because the comparison has no house position in it. The day one of the compared cards is HeyMax's own, every one of those pages acquires a question mark. Not because HeyMax would rig the comparison, I have no reason to think it would, but because the reader cannot verify that it hasn't, and the reader now has a reason to wonder. The mitigation is structural, not cosmetic. A permanent, visible marker on every page where the HeyMax card appears in a comparison. A published ranking methodology that predates the card. And a hard rule that the house card is ranked by the same criteria as everything else, including on the occasions when that ranks it fourth. This is not compliance theater. It is protecting the specific asset that makes the card cheap to launch in the first place. If the estate loses its neutrality, the card has to buy its traffic like everyone else, and the business case gets worse by exactly the amount of the thing that made it attractive. Which is also the strongest argument against Route C, the bank co-brand from Chapter 4. A co-brand makes HeyMax the promoter of one bank's card, permanently, on pages whose entire value is that they are not that. The economics of a co-brand are good. The strategic cost is the estate, and the estate is worth more. The second channel is the community, and it needs a different posture entirely. Singapore's Miles community is small, expert, public, and it reviews cards on their merits. The Mile Lion gave the incumbent HeyMax card partner a verdict of take it or leave it, and explained exactly why. A HeyMax branded card will be reviewed on the same terms, by the same people, within days of launch. There is no version of this where you manage that coverage. There is only a version where you are ready for it. So brief them before launch. Give them the real numbers, including the caps. Let the honest verdict land. A community that catches you overselling is the same community that documents the arbitrage, and as Chapter 8 established, that community is your launch cohort. And then the one rule I would write on the wall. Launch at the rate you can hold. Chocolate launched at 2 max miles per dollar on virtually everything, and then spent 16 months walking it back through 5 separate public retreats, AXS removed, transactions suspended, caps imposed, the rate halved, bill payments capped. Each of those cost more goodwill than the launch bought, and the product ended up at take it or leave it, with a reputation for changing the deal. Amaze did a smaller version of the same thing. Points removed from linked card transactions, then a 1% domestic fee added in March 2025, and a foreign exchange spread that has been widening since May 2022. It survives, but on a narrower proposition than it launched with, and the Mile Lion's August 2026 review is a catalog of nerfs with a still worth it, just about at the end. Both of those companies bought their launch numbers with a promotional budget and paid for them with trust. That lesson is available to HeyMax for free, and it is the single most valuable thing in this chapter. A card that launches at 0.4 miles per dollar and stays at 0.4 miles per dollar for 3 years is a better asset than one that launches at 2 and arrives at 0.4 anyway, because the first one is believed. Referral, briefly, because a rewards company's instinct will be to lean on it. Member get member paid in miles is the obvious play, and it is a faucet with a self-serve handle. Cap it in absolute miles per referrer per year. Require the referee to reach the day 30 active definition from the last chapter before either side is paid. And model what happens if one member with a large audience decides to industrialize it, because in this community somebody will. Finally, the positioning question, which is really a question about what the card is for. There are 2 honest stories available. The card that earns max miles where nothing else does. Bill payments, insurance, utilities, government, medical. Small, true, defensible, and it does not pretend to compete on rate. The card that closes the loop. HeyMax members already earn miles at 800 merchants and burn them across a shelf of airline and hotel partners. The card is the missing surface, the place the currency works when there is no partner link to click. That is a product story rather than a rate story, and it is the one I would tell, because it is the only story that survives a member comparing the earn rate to their credit card. What neither story can survive is being told alongside a launch rate that has to be withdrawn. Which brings the marketing chapter back to the Arithmetic chapter, where it belongs. Chapter 11, Expansion and the Asymmetry. The brief's last clause was market expansion, and there is one structural fact that governs the entire answer. A Singapore payments license does not passport. There is no ASEAN equivalent of the European directives. Singapore is not part of a mutual recognition regime that lets a major payment institution license issue electronic money in Kuala Lumpur or Jakarta. Every market is a fresh application to a fresh regulator with fresh capital, fresh local directors, a fresh compliance function, a fresh safeguarding bank, and a fresh position in a queue measured in quarters. What a Singapore license buys abroad is credibility, with correspondent banks, with partners, with other regulators who know what the authorities' process costs. That is real and it is worth something. It is not a permission. Here is what that means market by market, cross-referenced against this series' own verdicts, which were reached on entirely different grounds. Singapore, major payment institution, 250,000 base capital, 200,000 security. The only market where a card is buildable now. The series verdict was trust first at home. Malaysia, a bank negara electronic money issuer approval. A standard issuer must maintain capital funds of 1 million ringgit or 8% of its outstanding electronic money liabilities, whichever is higher. Note the structure of that. The capital requirement scales with your float. Success raises the capital call. The series verdict on Malaysia was no on entry, yes on the corridor. Indonesia, a Bank Indonesia electronic money license, 3 billion rupiah of paid-up capital, increasing in proportion to the float. And a hard ceiling that ends the conversation, a maximum of 49% foreign ownership for non-bank electronic money issuers. Sit with that one. The Indonesia volume in this series concluded no on entry, yes on the wedge, take the earn, skip the country, and it reached that on market structure, competitive density, and the ownership test. The 49% cap confirms the same verdict from a completely independent direction. A Singapore company cannot control an Indonesian electronic money issuer. It can own a minority of one. Any card-led Indonesia plan means handing majority control of the licensed entity to an Indonesian partner, which is a different business, not an expansion. Thailand, Bank of Thailand electronic payment licensing, local incorporation, Thai ownership rules. The series said yes to Thailand, phased with the treaty as the gate on the earn side. Vietnam, a State Bank of Vietnam intermediary payment services license, deliberately limited in number. The series said yes and start the free half now. Hong Kong, a stored value facility license from the monetary authority there, a genuinely separate and demanding regime, not a lighter version of Singapore's. Japan, registration as a funds transfer service provider or prepaid payment instrument issuer under Japan's own Payment Services Act. The series called Japan the first yes, with a deadline attached. Now put the pattern together, because it produces a doctrine. Every market on that list requires local incorporation, local capital that scales with float, local directors, local compliance staff, a local safeguarding institution, and a local review queue. The Singapore build is $2.5 to $4 million and about a year. Each subsequent market is most of that again, and nothing transfers except the software. Compare that to how the rest of HeyMax expands. The rewards platform expands by signing partners. Capital light, corridor first, and the same product works in every market from the day the contract is signed. That is why this series has been able to talk about the Thai corridor, the Vietnamese free half, and the Indonesian wedges things HeyMax could start next quarter. None of them require a license. A card expands by obtaining licenses, capital-heavy, market by market, with nothing reusable but the code. That asymmetry is the most important thing in this chapter, and it has a consequence that I think is easy to miss inside a company that has spent 2 years thinking about expansion. A card is a Singapore product with a Singapore business case. It does not get to borrow the expansion story from the rest of the business because the expansion story does not apply to it. If the card cannot justify itself on Singapore volume alone, 150,000 members, of whom 44,500 were monthly active at the last disclosure. Then it does not get built on the promise of what it becomes in Bangkok, because what it becomes in Bangkok is another $2.5 million and another 18 months. And notice what the Singapore-specific advantages are, because they are exactly the things that make it a Singapore product. MyInfo, which does not travel. The shared responsibility framework's card exclusion, which is a Singapore rule. An existing member base and an existing search estate, which are Singapore-weighted. And a partner card already in market, which is a Singapore arrangement. 4 advantages, all local, none exportable. One honest counterargument, which I want to give its full weight. A card generates transaction data, where a member shops how much, how often, in what category, continuously, for everyone who uses it, rather than only at the moment they click a partner link. That data is genuinely valuable to a rewards platform. It tells you which merchants to sign, which offers convert, and which members are worth what. That is the best strategic argument for owning the rail rather than renting it, and it does not appear anywhere in the interchange arithmetic. It is not nothing. But 2 things temper it. First, HeyMax's affiliate model already sees intent at the moment of purchase for the merchants it has signed. The card adds the merchants it has not signed, which is useful, but is a smaller increment than it first appears. Second, using card transaction data to target offers is a consent and privacy question in every market, and a major payment institution using payment data for marketing is a conversation with the authority you would rather have before launch than after. So the data argument is real, it is worth something, and it is worth less than $3 million on its own. It is a reason to prefer Route B, where you get the data without the license, over doing nothing. It is not a reason to skip to Route A. Which brings me, finally, to what I would actually do. Chapter 12, The Verdict and the Falsifiers. The brief asked how to build a debit card. I have answered that. 1 regulatory application covering 2 of the 7 payment services, 11 technical approvals from 6 counterparties, roughly 2.5 to 4 million Singapore dollars, and roughly a year. Now the question the brief did not ask, which is whether to. My verdict is a conditional no, and the condition is not about money. No to Route A as a first move. Not because HeyMax cannot get a major payment institution license. It can, the criteria are all satisfiable, and chapters 2 and 3 are a map rather than a wall. The reason is chapter 7. A HeyMax issued card gets the interchange leg and nothing else, because HeyMax has no float business and, as a licensed e-money issuer, specifically must not have one. That card sustainably pays somewhere between 0.3 and 0.5 max miles per dollar. The card members hold today pays 1 on the first $2,000 a month and costs HeyMax nothing to run. Spending $3 million and 18 months to give your members a worse card is not a strategy. It is a project that has forgotten what it was for. No to Route C, the bank co-brand, on different grounds entirely. The economics are the best of the 4, and the strategic cost is the search estate, which is worth more than the bounty. You cannot run the comparison engine and be one of the compared. No to Route D, the overlay. It is the option that looks most like HeyMax, and its economics have already been falsified in public, in the same city, under the same interchange regime, by a better capitalized competitor who spent 5 years finding out. Amaze earns no points on linked card spend and charges 1% on domestic transactions. That is not a company iterating toward product market fit. That is a company that found the bottom. Which leaves Route B, and here my answer is a qualified yes, but not first. Do this first, and it costs nothing. Chocolate has just changed the deal on HeyMax's members without HeyMax's consent. From October, no Chocolate customer earns a single max mile without parking 5,000 Singapore dollars. That is a material downgrade to the earned surface of HeyMax's most important card partner, announced by the partner, affecting HeyMax's members. That is the moment of maximum leverage, and it is right now. Renegotiate the economics. Or better, sign a second card partner, because a second partner card is nearly free, removes the single counterparty risk that Chapter 4 flagged, and eliminates most of the strategic reason to issue at all. Then, if that is not enough, the sponsored pilot. Route B, virtual only, push provisioning on day 1, 10,000 members, 0.4 miles per dollar, hard merchant category and velocity limits designed before the card art and attacked by someone paid to break them. The purpose of that pilot is not revenue. It is to measure the one number nobody has and nobody can model. How much incremental spend a HeyMax card actually captures from members who already carry 4 miles cards. Everything in this volume is downstream of that number, and none of it can substitute for it. Write the go, no-go threshold down before the pilot starts, because afterwards, there will be a persuasive argument for moving it. And then, only then, the license. 12 to 18 months, the U-Trip sequence, launch sponsored, graduate to principal, and budget the reissue event when the bin changes. And do not export it. Export the platform which travels on contracts. Leave the card in Singapore, where MyInfo, the shared responsibility framework's card exclusion, the member base and the search estate all live, and where none of them can be packed. Now the falsifiers, because a verdict without them is just an opinion. 1, and it has a date. If Chocolate raises the card's caps again without a balance requirement, or restores the Miles Multiplier while dropping the $5,000 minimum, then interchange is carrying more than I think. My funding model in Chapter 7 is wrong, and the case for issuing improves substantially. This is the cheapest test available, and it costs nothing but attention. 2. If a Singapore interchange schedule ever becomes public and consumer debit is materially above 1%, the arithmetic in Chapter 6 moves, and the sustainable earn rate moves with it. I could not find that number. I showed you exactly what I tried. If you can find it, check me. 3. If HeyMax's true marginal cost per max mile is meaningfully below 1 cent, well under the 1.25 cent price at which members buy them through miles for returns, then a 1 mile per dollar card becomes fundable on interchange alone, and my central conclusion collapses. This is the one number that would change everything. HeyMax knows it, and I do not, and it is the first thing I would want on the table in any real version of this decision. 4. If the pilot in Stage 1 shows genuinely incremental spend, members putting meaningful volume through a 0.4 mile card they would otherwise have put on a 4 mile card, then the card is doing something my economics do not capture, and the data argument from Chapter 11 becomes load-bearing rather than supplementary. 5. If a Singapore sponsor emerges offering interchange economics materially better than the market-implied floor, Route B gets cheaper, the bridge gets shorter, and the whole plan accelerates. And one thing that would not change my mind, which is worth saying because it will be argued. A competitor launching a card is not a reason to launch a card. If a rival rewards platform ships one next quarter, the arithmetic in Chapters 6 and 7 does not change by a single basis point. They will be funding it out of venture capital, exactly as Chocolate funded 2 miles per dollar out of a promotional budget, and exactly as Chocolate stopped. Watching a competitor spend $3 million to discover the same thing is not a loss. It is a free experiment. Let me end where I started. HeyMax already has a debit card. It has had one since February 2025. It has taken the loyalty economics of a card program for 18 months without the license, the capital, the safeguarded float, the fraud losses, or the liquidity risk. And when that card's members found the arbitrage and ran on the company in March 2025, it was Chocolate that stopped every transaction and suspended withdrawals, not HeyMax. That is a remarkably good position, and it was arrived at partly by design and partly by luck. The right response to a partner changing the terms is to fix the partnership or add a second one. It is not to spend $3 million becoming the partner. Build the card when you can answer one question with data rather than conviction. What does a member spend on a HeyMax card that they would not have spent anywhere else? Until then, The most valuable thing about this whole analysis is that somebody else is already running the experiment and publishing the results every time they change the caps.